brown, B being the reddish yellow, and so on and so forth. The thing that you have to take note of is that most of the time, 85 to 90% of the patients that walk in fall into the A-shaped category, right? So the thing I'm trying to get you guys to do right now is try and simplify your shade selection. If you know 90% of the patients are going to be A-shaped, probably we can quite safely ignore the B, C, D shapes, okay? So, patient comes in, automatically you know it's 90% going to be A shape. So, we have chosen the hue. Let's talk about chroma. Chroma talks about the intensity, the depth of the color, okay? Meaning to say, if you look at a fruit, if you look at like a mango, for example, the mango, as it grows riper, it goes from a pale yellow to a bright yellow to a dark yellow. That is what we call increase of chroma, increase in chromacity. Okay? In the Vita shade guide, that's how we determine the shade A1, A2, A3, A3.5, and A4. Okay? So, when you get a crown back from your lab technician, you don't say the crown is too dark. You should say things like the crown is too chromatic. So the technician understands, I need to make the yellowness of the crown less intense. You understand? However, because if you say the crown is too dark, the lab technician may think that the saying that the tooth is literally dark like a shadow. And this is where value comes in. Value is a little bit hard to describe because value describes the whiteness of the tooth. Now, we don't fully know how to measure this, okay? That's why it's not even in the Vita shade guide. You can rearrange the Vita shade tabs according to value, but it doesn't really tell us much. So what I want you guys to think is that rather than thinking of the word value, I want you to consider translucency. Because translucency is directly proportional to the value that you get on the tooth. Let me explain. When you get a tooth that is too translucent, the light shines through the tooth a lot more. In this photo, the teeth is shining behind a white background. So as you can see, the translucent part is a lot brighter. Can you see that? Now, inside the patient's mouth, it's behind a black background. So if you use a composite material that is too translucent, the tooth filling, the filling that you did, is going to look a little bit gray. And you have all seen that. You have all seen that when you do your class 3s, right? The multiple big class 3s, class 3, class 3, class 3, class 3, class 3. You will do it looks really nice when the patient's lying down. The moment the patient sits up and the patient smiles, you can see shadows. Do you understand? That is low in value because it is translucent. So when you, again, talk to your technician, when you feel that the color is not wrong, you need to tell the technician, is the crown too translucent, therefore it looks darker, or is the crown too chromatic, therefore it looks darker? It's very different. Understand? So, another thing that determines the brightness of the tooth, the value of the tooth, is texture. There's a reason why younger teeth look whiter. Okay? One of the reasons is because for younger teeth, the outer surface of the tooth is more textured. There's more texture to the surface. When you have more texture, it means that there's more light scattering on the tooth surface. Therefore, the tooth looks a lot whiter. You look at someone who's much older, the outer surface of the enamel is a lot more smoother, it's more polished, therefore the light shines through, it scatters less. That's why for the older teeth, they look a little darker. That's one of the reasons why. Alright? So, what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that front teeth is comprised of two different structures that contributes two different sets of properties of aesthetics. Okay? So if you look at the enamel is the thing that gives you translucency, that gives you the texture, that gives you the value. Yeah? Whereas dentin is the thing that gives you the hue and gives you the chromacity. This is the reason why most of the time when you do your class 3, class 4 restoration, you always need at least 2 shades. Because you need 2 different shades to reflect 2 different aesthetic properties. Okay? So, for dentin, you kind of determine the shade of the patient basing on age. Okay? So, as you know, because younger teeth, alright, younger teeth are less chromatic. For older teeth, they are more demineralized, therefore they are a lot more chromatic as you go. Okay? As for enamel, the younger the teeth, the brighter the teeth, the higher the value. So you choose the shades accordingly, right? Now, of course, different brands will have different systems in naming the shades. For the brand that we're using today by GC, it's called Genial Anterior. It comes in a few different styles. You have the opaque shades, which is the A02 or A03. O stands for opaque. And then you have enamel shade, which is AE, JE, which is adult enamel or junior enamel, right? And then you have the normal A2, A3, A3. That's basically the transitional areas. So if I use this case as an example, if I want to restore the black triangle, and I use one shade, just one shade only, that is a normal like A2 or A3 shade, chances are, because I didn't take into consideration to make sure I choose a shade that is opaque, the film is going to look darker because the light is shining through. So for cases like this, if I want to restore this, I have to make sure that I apply an opaque shade first. Once I apply an opaque shade, then I can apply a transitional shade to blend the color, to alter the chroma. Alright, this is now where I put my A2 or A3. Okay? Now, so for this case, I isolate, rubber dam, and for this one I use 2 shades, 2 colors, 2 layers, A02 and A3. This is what it looks like before, like immediately after the filling was done. You can see the dehydration on the tooth next to it, and then if you give it around 24 to 48 hours, the dehydration reduces. Okay? So, to summarize what I was trying to tell you a while ago, on top of the fact that when you choose your material, you have to make sure that you choose the right handleability, stiffness that's based on your personal preference. You also want to be very familiar with the opacity, the translucency of the filling material. So this is the system that we have, okay? So you have your A1, A2, A3, all the way to B1, B2, B3, which I almost never use. But there's also an inside shade or an opaque shade that's A02 or A03, and an outside shade that is JE and AE. So far so good? Now, when you buy your materials, this is the tip that I'm going to give you regardless of what brand you go for. When you buy a new brand of materials, a new set of materials, never buy the intro kit of your composite. Why? Because every intro kit, every brand offers, there will be 7 shades, there will be 3 shades that you will use a lot of, and there will be 4 shades that you will never use. Those are the ones that end up expiring. Okay? So my advice is that if you want to start using this material, the shade that I always start off with is A2, A3, A3.5. That would be your transitional shades. And then you have one opaque shade, which is A02, which I use 95% of the time. And I have AE, which is the outside shade, which is what I use around 80% of the time. So this would cover most of your anterior cases. And once you're used to it and you want to kind of like do a bit more, be a bit more versatile, that's when we can choose more shades, different shades. Is that clear? Right? Now, I'm going to show you a case which I call the perfect case, and I rarely have perfect cases. Yeah? And I'm going to use this case to show you the 10 steps. This is Jack. Jack came in like this. The reason why he broke his front tooth is because he was on his phone and he walked into a glass door. So he came in like this. I had a look. He wasn't in a lot of pain, which is fine. So what we did is that we took some photos and I analyzed the case. Now, typically when we have a class 4 case like this, we know how we are normally doing it is that we would put a clear strip, use our finger to put on the back of the tooth, and build the tooth up as well as we can, and then adjust. The problem with that is quite hard for me to, A, I'm going to waste a lot of time adjusting teeth. B, it's going to be quite hard for me to control the layers that I'm supposed to put in. Especially for this case where if you look at it, his teeth are quite reclined. So the positioning is very hard to control. So what I did for this case is I took an impression and I did a wax up. Now, I know what you're thinking. I have no time to do a wax up. I do not want to do a wax up. I know, I understand. I still do this, but very rarely. I'm going to go through other methods as well to create the palatal anatomy. But for this case, we did a wax up. And the reason why I did a wax up is because I want to design the palatal anatomy outside of the mouth. So when I transfer it inside the mouth, I no longer have to worry about adjusting the palatal side. Meaning to say, I can do the entire treatment without using a hand mirror, which I love. Okay? So, once I have that, I copy the anatomy using a palatal stent with putty. Okay? The putty, we roll, we copy, and we're going to transfer that into the patient's mouth. Okay? Now, for the patient's mouth, this is what we use. Okay? Rubber dam. A while ago, someone asked me about rubber dam and do I use a floss? I used to use a floss. I don't use a floss anymore. Okay? And then what we do is exactly the same as what we talked a while ago, right? You etch, you select the bond, and remember everything we talked about the bonding agent, why we use the bonding agent that we're showing you today, why I like it a lot. And then you create the palatal shell. And I create the palatal shell directly on the putty itself. Now the key thing is that I have to make sure the palatal shell I create is thin, is very thin, okay? Because I need to make sure I create enough, I leave enough space to put the opaque material on. Alright? There's a line that I place in there to indicate where the crack is, so I know at the very least I have to place a filling that passes that line. Another thing that I'm going to show you what I use is that I use a paintbrush for my anterior cases. I love the paintbrush. Okay? There are different styles, different methods, different ways to do this. I can go through this with you in a moment. But using a paintbrush and modeling resin allows me to create a very, very thin shell that I can transfer onto the patient's mouth looking something like that. And the shell is so thin, it's virtually see-through. Once I create the shell, then I'm going to create the palatal wall, the interproximal wall. Okay? And traditionally how we do it is that we would use, again, clear strip, a mylar strip. The problem with using a mylar strip is that I end up with a flat edge, which, as you know, natural teeth doesn't look like that. Natural teeth has a curvature, has a convexity that I want to copy. So what do I use? I use the same sectional matrix that I use for my posterior teeth in my anterior cases. Okay? So we use this to build it up, a wall that looks exactly like that. So now I've converted my class 4 into almost like a class 1. And all I have to do right now is focus on filling up that hole with the right type of material, which I'll show you how I do later on. For this case, I used A02 and A2. I added some tints for 2 reasons, because this was a young patient with some hyperplasia. The second reason is because I know I'm using this for lecture, so I have to show off a little bit. Then we added the final layer on top, which is the AE. And I covered the glycerin. I'll explain why glycerin is important later on. And then I did my shaping, my interproximal polishing, my surface polishing. And then because I know this is a young patient, I had to recreate textures, okay? So we added some lines over there to create the pericymata, the textures on the enamel surface. We cleaned that up, and it looks something like that. The entire process did not require me to use a mouth mirror. I barely have to adjust anything on the palatal surface after everything is done. It's really safe, straightforward, really predictable, and really easy. So far, so good. Fantastic. Now, I'm going to show you. So the question a while ago was that, okay, I don't want to do a wax up. Can I create a plain wall some other way? I'm going to show you this case. This is Ella. Ella came in, and initially she said that my front tooth was chipped. I looked at it and I thought, okay, this looks straightforward, that's fine. Until she opened her mouth and I realized this is how she bites, which is a very weird bite. I took an x-ray, I realized, oh, okay, she had perio. The bone level is shrinking, but it's stable right now, which is why there's that movement. Now, for this sort of case, one thing that I like to do is basically called direct mock-up. Direct mock-up is a method where I would take expired composite, I would roll it up in a ball with my hand, I would put it directly onto the patient's mouth, no edge, no bond, roughly shape it, light cure, and show it to the patient. I would show her, Ella, is this okay? And then she would say yes or no. If she says yes, what I will then do is very quickly and roughly adjust the palatal surface to make sure that when she bites, it doesn't knock it off. To make sure my palatal surface is okay. Then, once that's fine, I take a putty index, just like we saw a while ago, directly into the patient's mouth. So I copy that. And then I flick it off. Make sense so far? Rubber dam. By the way, no more force. I use the shell, I use the putty to create the shell, as you see here. You build it up. It's A2, AO2, AE, just like the basic kit I showed you a while ago. This is what it looks like post-op. This is what she looks like when she bites down. And like that. We're going to revisit this case later on, because she came back a few years later, so you can see how she looks like. Yeah? Another case, as an example, I can't remember this student's name, but this is pre-op. This is the mock-up. To show the gentleman, is this okay? Yes. So my point is that if you have expired composites in your clinic, don't throw it away. This is very helpful. Now, I want you to pay attention to this, okay? This is how he originally is. This is what it looks like after I did my cavity preparation. Some of you would look at this and say, wow, that's very aggressive, that's very invasive. The truth of the matter is that this patient has very deep decay, and after I remove the decay, there is a lot of unsupported enamel. Let me ask you a question. How many times have you done a class 4 restoration, and after the filling is done, you can see a white line? The reason why you get that white line is because you are bonding on unsupported enamel. When you bond on unsupported enamel, it delaminates and you end up with that white line. And you will see a lot of cases where I made that mistake later on. This is AE, AO2, A3. Alright? It's always these few cases. So just to show, there's one more method. Another method is, say for example, you want to speed things up a little bit. It's a method called the BRB technique. Some of you online have seen this before. Okay, it's invented by these three Italian guys. And what they did is that when you have a tooth with a class 4 defect, you put the silicone putty in first. You take it out, you use a pencil to roughly mark out where the tooth should be. You use a drill or burr to grind that out. It's not going to be very exact, but it's going to be better than doing it freehand. Then you put it back inside the patient's mouth. Okay? I use this method a lot, you know where? For class 3s, for multiple class 3s. When you have something like this, I do the same thing. I do a small piece of putty. Then I just grind out the defects. I put it back in the patient's mouth. It makes my class 3s a lot faster. Alright? Because I don't need to worry about excess management. I don't need to spend too much time on removals. Okay? So I'll use this case as an example. Alice came. She had composite veneers done around 6 years ago. Not by me, by someone else. She was not happy with the color of it anymore, and she also has developed a diastema. So when she came in, she didn't want to come back. She wanted to have everything done on the same day. So this is what we did. We took an impression using the putty again, and then just like how I showed you a while ago, I use a pencil to mark down roughly where I want the final tooth position to be. Okay? I grind it off. And then, same thing, rubber dam. I went ahead to remove the old restoration carefully, and I used the putty that I just created a while ago to create a little shell. This method is really, really good, especially when you have diastema cases, right? And then you build it up, step by step. This is AO2, A2, AE. Now, and you do your shaping, your polishing, and you assess. One of the downsides for this BRB technique is that patients don't get to see what the end result looks like beforehand. Okay? So when she had a little look at this, when everything is done, she would say, "Doctor, it looks very good, but I feel that it's too long." That's okay. Then you just go ahead and adjust the edge. So this is one of the limitations of the BRB technique, but still very, very helpful. In some cases, unfortunately, wax up is going to be the only way possible. This is Myra. Myra fractured her teeth. She came in around 20 minutes after the fracture happened. She was in a lot of pain. I couldn't do anything for her. I couldn't even take an impression. So this is where, thankfully, digital dentistry is helpful. I can scan her teeth, touching her teeth, and you create a wax up or digital mock-up, which eventually, after 1 or 2 days, we can build a tooth back for her. And while we're at it, make the teeth look nice and straight as well. So far, so good? Now, I'm going to show you how I do my silicone putty. We did a workshop of this yesterday with another group, and what I was telling them is that the fabrication of the putty is the most important step. If you make the step wrong, everything is going to be wrong. But if you make the step well and it's nice and clear, it's going to help you tremendously and minimize failures, make things very, very good. The steps are as follows. As you can see, you etch, you selective etch, you add your bonding agent, you light cure, you do your shell, just like we showed you a while ago. You put it back in the mouth. little bit of floorboard to make sure that the joints are connected. You pray very hard that it doesn't break. So it looks something like that. Then you build up the wall. Now, when you build up the wall, you use the sectional matrix. The same idea applies. Remember how I said, for posterity, when you put on your sectional matrix, you want to make sure that it matches the height of the tooth next door. For this is the same as well. Because you want to make sure when you build up the proximal wall, it's the correct height, it's not too high. If that's too high, you tend to overbuild. Okay? So you keep that level roughly the same as the tooth that you're trying to copy. You build up the wall. You use a micro brush. And that's how it looks, okay? So now is how you convert class 4 into kind of like class 1. So far, so good? All good? Alright, now that we've done the outer bits, now we're going to talk about inner parts, okay? Now, there's a technique that I want to share with you guys. Is that when you're dealing with a young patient like this, a lot of times the tooth that you're trying to copy has more characteristics, translucencies, you have the mamelons that you want to copy. And sometimes quite hard to tell. Now, everyone in this room has a phone, has a camera, and everyone in this room should know how to edit photos now. So there's a trick that I was taught by my mentor, it's called the deep contrast view. And what you do is that after you take a photo with your phone, you go to the photo editing software, you increase contrast, you reduce brightness or exposure, and what it does, it highlights a lot of the textures, a lot of the characteristics that you're trying to copy here. This tells me how many mamelons I need to copy. This tells me how much translucency there is. So when I build up the tooth next door, it's going to be a lot easier for me to have a better mental idea of how to build the tooth up. Right? So, for this case, what am I seeing over here? I know that you have the mamelons. I know there is a little bit of opacity around the incisor edge that I want to copy. Now, for this case, again, it's an old case, that's why I did the wax up. But there are other methods that you can do, as I showed you a while ago. You know the steps right now. Isolate, you etch, you do your palatal shell, you build up the interproximal wall, then you do your layering. AO2 and E2. I'll show you how I do that during the live demo a while later on, and you cover it up with AO2 with the enamel shape and maybe some tints if you want to. You do your shaping, you add your texture, and this is what it looks like at the end. Now, the lovely thing about the deep contrast view, it also allows you to assess your own work. Because now I can turn on deep contrast view again. What do you see? I know for a fact that the tooth that I'm trying to copy is a little bit whiter. It's higher in value because it is dehydrated. That is fine. I know that I have managed to recreate the incisal halo, and I have recreated the mamelon. But, for those very, very clear, you can see there's a white line. That's the white line that we talked about. Why is there a white line? As I mentioned, you have what we call unsupported enamel. Now, to go back to what I said a while ago, this is what I used to do as a mistake. What I used to do is that when I prepare my teeth for a class 4 restoration, I would remove caries, and then I would bevel. The problem is that I am beveling on unsupported enamel. Meaning to say, that bit of enamel will delaminate and chip off. What I should do instead is that after I do my caries removal, I must always remove all the unsupported enamel first, before I do my beveling. So I know I am beveling on healthy enamel. This is number one, to eliminate the white lines. The second thing to remember is that when you're beveling, you have to make sure you're beveling on enamel. Now, how much do you bevel? Everyone does it differently. The Italians, they like to bevel very, very little, 0.5 millimeters. I do 2 millimeters. Now, the thing to remember is this. A lot of people used to think, by beveling, you are increasing your bonding surface area, you are increasing your bond strength. The research says that's not the case. The only reason why you bevel is so that you have better color blending. Understand? Now, if you look at some people on Instagram and they post really, really nice class for restorations, wow, it's so real. A lot of times because that's how they bevel. They do what we call an infinity bevel. Of course you cannot see the transition line because it's almost like a veneer prep. So it looks great, but it's way too invasive. So I really, really don't like to do that. So anyway, let's go back here. We're going to look at Lego shell, which we showed you a while ago. Now, the second mistake that a lot of people make when you do your class 4 restoration and you find that the restoration is very gray, now we know it because it's too translucent. The mistake a lot of people make is that they don't put enough opaque layer. Now, let me give you an example. For those who's using 3M composites, you know that you have 3M enamel and 3M dentin, right? Dentin, the 3M dentin is meant to be the opaque shade. Most people don't put enough. Most people therefore put too much enamel shade that is too translucent. Okay? That's why your restorations, your class 4 restorations look a bit gray. You notice for this one, for my class 4s, most of the volume of my restoration is actually opaque. In fact, my opaque layer passes the EDJ. Okay? Then you put your transitional layer that is more towards the cervical part, and then you put your translucent layer, the enamel layer, that's more incisively. Alright? Now, this is the problem that I have with ceramics duo. Okay, with densify ceramics, is that both the dentin and enamel is too translucent. So that's why for their fillings, even though the handling is very good, I always get my fillings looking a little bit grayer. Okay? For those who use Ivoclar, it's the other way around. For Ivoclar, it's too opaque. The enamel layer is very opaque. Alright? So it looks very Hollywood. It looks very fake. It's like denture teeth sometimes. So I find it very hard to work with Ivoclar composites. For me. Anyway, if you go back to the tooth, if you add an opaque dentin layer, before you light curve, this is where you add your texture, your mamelons, yeah? To create that layer of translucency. Then you add the body layer that covers most of the cervical area. I like to sculpt it with paintbrush. And then you add the enamel layer that goes to the bottom. You wipe off the excess. And then you wipe. You check occlusion. And that's how it looks like so far. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time to talk about glycerin. How many of you have heard of something called the oxygen inhibition layer? Some of you have heard of it, there's some not. Now, what does it mean? To put it simply, in composite, you have what we call photoinitiators. These are the chemicals, when exposed to UV light, starts the polymerization process to make the material hard. You get that? The problem is that when these photoinitiators are exposed to oxygen, they don't work. Which means to say, when you lacquer a composite, the most outer layer of your composite is not set. Which is fine, because that allows us to add one layer over another layer over another layer over another layer. The problem is on the very, very final layer, there will always be around 40 microns of composite that's not set because that layer is exposed to oxygen. This is the reason why some of you find it's very impossible for me to adjust to polish my composite. I cannot polish my composite. Of course you cannot polish because you're polishing unpure composite. Why is my filling always stained very badly? Right? Why does it wear down very badly? Because you have a layer of unpure composite. So what we do is that after we do our final cure, we will put a layer of glycerin, which actually is just KY jelly that you can buy in the pharmacy. It's very cheap. Yeah? You cover it to block out the oxygen, and then you light it one more time. That would ensure that everything that you have there is nice and solid. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So, another thing that I do want to highlight is the fact that we always underestimate the effects of dehydration. This is a case that we have done a while back. I know this is a hard case because this patient had quite bad tetracycline staining. Okay? When we build this tooth up, it's the same steps that we have gone through. I'm not going to go through this in detail anymore. But one thing that you're going to notice after the filling is done is that it's going to look quite bad. Some of you are seeing it already. So when I saw this, I thought, oh, I need to redo this because the patient's not happy. But then, before the patient left, I had a look at my pre-op photos, and I realized that my pre-op photos, the teeth that I'm trying to compare, the 2-1, actually looks a lot more chromatic, right? If I put them side by side, I would realize that my buildup is actually not too bad. So I told the patient, please come back 2 days later, 2 to 3 days later, let your teeth rehydrate again, and we'll assess it. And if the color is still really bad, I will redo it for you. Okay? This is what the tooth looks like afterwards. It's still not perfect, but it's way better than immediate post-op. Patient is happy with it. So my point to all of you is just make sure you don't be scared if the color doesn't match. You always have to warn the patient about dehydration, or else they'll think that you didn't do a good job. Understand? Same case for this one. He didn't want to do internal bleaching for this case. He just wanted me to fix the class 4. This is what it looks like immediately afterwards. It looks like the color didn't match, but it turns out if you kind of like compare the two pre-op, actually, the color is matching quite nicely. So far, we're doing okay? So, we spent a lot of time on the shade of the tooth. I want to look at this case here. This is Angie. Angie has had multiple class 3 restorations done. I feel that the color is very good. The color is perfect. Matches very nicely. But something still doesn't look right. Tell me what's wrong. The shape is wrong. The shape is off. Okay? One of the things that I try to emphasize to participants is that a lot of times we get so focused on the shape of the tooth, right? We would look at a shape and we would look at our work and it doesn't look bad. And the question that people always ask, should I have used a different shade? Maybe the color is wrong. The truth of the matter is it's not the color, it's the shape of the tooth. This is a patient I saw quite some time back. She went to Malaysia to have some dental work done by beauticians, done really, really, really badly. I'm sure you have the same thing in Vietnam as well. Honestly, it didn't bother her until I pointed it out to her, because I was telling her, look, your teeth are not symmetrical. There is a lot of overhang that's causing a lot of swelling around the gums. if you look at how the teeth are angled, they're a little bit all over the place. Okay? So cases like this make me wonder, alright, so how do I even fix this? How do I even address this? The truth is that in cases like this, what we should be focusing on is more on the shape management. Okay? We look at the basic shape, we also look at the microanatomy, which we'll cover later on. But the main thing I want to cover is the basic shape first. Now, in my opinion, that is the most important part of aesthetic restoration. Sometimes you can get the color wrong, you can get the chroma a little bit off, patients will forgive you, patient may not even notice it. But if you get the symmetry wrong, if you get the shape wrong, the patient will not let you go. So the shape of the tooth, to me, is absolute key. Alright? So we're going to spend a little time on the outline of the tooth. A lot of times when we do our classical build-up, when we do like composite veneers and things like that, and after you're done, the tooth looks bad. It doesn't look right, it doesn't look symmetrical, it looks like a tombstone, right? And you're like, okay, I know I need to adjust this, but I don't know how to adjust it. I don't know where to begin. So I developed a step-by-step method to make sure that when you adjust it, as long as you follow these steps, you'll be fine. The first thing that we want to make sure is that we get the incisal edge correct. If you get the tooth one long, one short, adjust that first. Okay? So you want to make sure that the incisal edge is correct. The second thing that we want to adjust is what we call the axial inclination. People who do orthodontics will understand this very, very clearly. You know that when the tooth looks, when the axial inclination, which is this line over here, that passes through the midline of the tooth, is too straight, something is not right. You know, when you look at the front tooth, natural teeth angles inwards a little bit for all of them. So when you have a tooth that looks very square, like a tombstone, in order for me to alter the axial inclination, one of the things that we have to do is we have to make sure that the embrasures are correct. The embrasures basically the curvatures around the angles of the tooth. And this is the reason why when you look at a perfect smile, this part is more curved than that part. And by doing so, I'm shifting the midline from here to there. And therefore, giving the patient, giving the illusion that the teeth are angled slightly inwards. Does that make sense? So after you make sure that incisal edge is correct, this is the second thing that you need to adjust. You adjust the embrasures. After you adjust the incisal embrasure, you adjust the gingival embrasure. Sometimes those are too overbuilt, sometimes they're too fat. You want to adjust those as well. Now the third thing you want to adjust is basically the contacts, the interproximal contacts. Patients with very masculine, manly teeth, very square-looking teeth, they have very wide contacts. Okay? If you're dealing with someone who's more feminine, wants a more feminine smile, those contact areas are a lot smaller. So you want to adjust that using polishing strips. Then comes down to the incisal edge. If, say, for example, you're dealing with someone who's young, you have these little mamelons, these little incisal notches as well. So going back to this lady, I said to her, like, look, I'd like to offer you to do something for you. I am not going to touch your natural teeth. All I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the work that was done for you. I'm just going to adjust it. I'm not going to remove, I'm not going to add anything. I'm not going to touch your natural tooth. Are you okay for me to do that? She said, yes. This is before. This is what she looks like afterwards. And this is around 20 minutes of work. Following the step-by-step that I showed you a while ago. Let's go through this again. The incisal edges, they're more symmetrical. The embrasures, this part, looks a lot nicer. And because we played with the embrasure, we remove all the excess around the gingiva as well, I'm able to play with the axial inclination. Therefore, if you look at the case, it looks more symmetrical. Does that make sense? When the patient saw this, what do you think she said to me? can you do proper veneers now? Because now she understands what it could look like. Does that make sense? Good. Now the second thing we look at is line angles. The line angles is the corners and the edges on the tooth surface that sometimes can dictate what the tooth looks like. By playing with the line angles, I can make the tooth look longer, look shorter, look thinner, and a lot of times when you look at your own work and it looks off, most of the time is because of that. So that's the second thing that we adjust, is the line angles. And later on we'll show you how we adjust this. So this is the line angles. We can make it look thinner, or we can make it look fatter. So my point to all of you is that a lot of times you focus way too much on the shape of the tooth. What I'm telling you guys, if possible, spend a bit more time to focus on the shape of the tooth. You get the shape right, you can improve the aesthetics dramatically. We're going to illustrate this with one last case, and then we're going to do the live demo. This is who is she? This is Jennifer. Jennifer's about to get married. Okay? She couldn't afford veneers. She wants these gaps closed. Okay? So, if we look at this case, we analyze the smile. I like to measure teeth, and in some workshops I go in details on how to measure and understand golden ratio and things like that. But this is my thought process. We've gone through this a while ago. I know there's some incisal edge translucency that I need to recreate. And I know there's some opaque shade that I need to recreate near the cervical edge. In terms of the shape analysis, the reason why I think this is a very good restorative case is because the teeth are very narrow. So when you do the analysis, we know that I can afford to make the teeth wider. Okay? So this is a case that's very, very suitable to treat restoratively. I know, just like I showed you a while ago, that I need to make the incisal edge match. So I know for the 2-2, I need to make the tooth a bit longer. You see that? I also know that the axial inclination for this case is off. So in order for me to fix that, I know I have to adjust the embrasures. Remember what I shared with you a while ago. So given all of this information, I can then choose either to do this using a wax up, or in this case, what I did was I used the BRB technique. Okay? And it looks like this. We build the tooth up just like how we did a while ago, the edge. We bond. Remember I said the BRB technique is fantastic for diastemas? This is a very good example. Use a little key. And then we have a shell. And then we build up the interproximals. We build it up. AO2, A3, AE. Glycerin, because I need to place the glycerin to make sure the outer surface is nice and set. That way I'm able to predictably adjust the tooth. And then we modify and make sure I refine the line angles. I'll show you how to do that. Adding the microanatomy. And then polish. I don't use a paste anymore, but in this case I did. So, this is what it looks like afterwards. This is is how it looks like with her biting down on the front teeth. So far so good? Good. Now, let's look at one more mistake I made. This is Rita. She's a very scary woman. For this sort of case is hard because you know that it's not like the previous case where the teeth are very, very well aligned. So for this case, what did we do? In order for me to restore, because her request is don't touch any other teeth, only fix that one. Okay? So in order for me to do something, I have to go back to do what I taught you a while ago, the direct mock-up method. Yeah? So we took some expired composite, I modified some of the existing composite. I do some very, very brief shape analysis. I'm not going to go through this in detail with you guys. We went ahead and do a composite mock-up. So I asked her, is this okay? She said yes. Okay, good. So I copy and paste. Same cutting method I showed you a while ago. I remove interproximal wall. Three. Build up. Build up. Build up. Everything looks good until I take out rubber band. Can you see that? Now, when I first saw this, I thought, hey, hang on, why does it look translucent? I'm very, very sure I did the layering correct. Why does it still look translucent? Maybe it's a dehydration, I'm not sure. But one of the things that I do nowadays, if I want to make sure that my shade is correct, is I get them to bite edge to edge. And I compare the film that I did against the tooth downstairs where it's not dehydrated. And I say, hang on, you know what? That actually matches the shape. So why did that corner look translucent? And one of the things I realized is this. There's an opaque band. Can you see that? Whenever you see a white line, what does it mean? It's unsupported enamel. Right? So, what did I do? I don't have to redo the whole thing. This is a lot of thing about composites. This is basically the reason why it looks translucent at the edge is because there's a bit of an illusion. I'm not going to go through this with you, but you can see actually A and B actually is the same color. Now, how do I remove it? Rub it down again. I expose the composite. You can see the white line there. Sorry, you can see the white line. That's unsupported enamel. So grind that off. And what I do is I clean the area, condition the area with sandblast, 27 microns. And then immediately you can bond again. The edge is really just there to clean the exposed enamel, exposed dentin. It's not necessary, but I still do it. Then I follow the same recipe that I use a while ago. AO3, A3, AE, and this is what it looks like immediately afterwards. Sounds okay? Good. Now, the question that I then ask is that, is it actually possible to do composite restorations with one shape? That will speed things up a little bit, right? This is Hazel. Hazel had orthodontics done. She had peg laterals, so the laterals look much smaller. So we tried a method that we learned from the Scala Italiana group, and the method is called the labial ring technique. What it is that we isolate the tooth, we etch, we bond, and we use Solaris sculpt. The same Solaris sculpt you saw a while ago for posterior teeth. And what we do is that we apply it on the surface, the labial surface of the tooth. Freehand. You apply one, you apply the other side, So you basically create a labial shell. Once you create a labial shell, if you look from the back, you can see there's a gap. You use a sectional matrix, you inject flow to fill up the gap. And then you do the usual. Glycerin, you polish. And look at that. Because Solaris Sculpt is so good at mimicking colors and is opaque enough, I don't end up with a filling that looks great. Alright? The tooth is the material is very polishable, very easy to polish. The color matches very, very nicely to the natural tooth structure. So this is the end results. This is what it looks like. This was the case that we showed you in the very beginning of the lecture a while ago. That's the peg lateral. Okay? What else can we do with injectables? Well, of course, for injectables, you know about the injection molding technique, right? For injection molding technique, it's very common. I've done a few cases and they look great. They're very easy. I'm not going to go into detail. This is Anya. What we did was she wanted to do something for her front teeth. One is to change the shape of the tooth, one is to change the discoloration of the tooth. After we did some orthodontics, we did a scan, and we built up the tooth. We did 2 build-ups. 1, 2. And then using this build-up, we use the GC exit which is a clear putty or a clear matrix system that looks something like this. And this allows us to inject the injectable material into the tooth really, really simply and predictably. And that's one tooth. We do the same thing on the other side. Inject. That's the second tooth. After a little bit of adjustment, polishing, that's basically it. Apologies for the bleeding. But yeah, so this is basically one of the few things that will be covered in the lecture that I mentioned a while ago. Again, if it's something, this is an event that's going to be heavily supported by GC. If you want to know more about the injectable material and how it can be utilized, this is a good chance for you to learn from an expert. If you're interested, just take a scan of the QR code and then we can have a, hopefully I can see you in Singapore. Alright? Okay. Do we have any questions? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back, we'll do the live demo, and then that's it for today. Okay?